Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast. I'm Paul. That's Ben. Thank you for joining our conversation. Don't worry, it's a conversation we would be having anyway.
Yeah.
Hit us up on all the social medias at Fantasy Formula One Podcast or email info@fantasyformula1podcast.com. Today, we are going to do some notes, observations, and musings about FP1 and FP2 that just finished for Bahrain.
And just to kind of put you where we stand on our status for Fantasy Formula One, Paul lives and breathes spreadsheets and analytics, and I learned that FP1 stands for Free Practice One today. So there's our benchmark, and let's go.
Cool. All right, so a couple things that are changed from last season, or that I want to make sure we establish really well for this season. First off, is this year there are 24 races, not 23.
Yeah.
There were 23 last year, 24 this year, and 6 sprint races. And we've talked about them ad nauseum in other podcasts, but their sprint races are 100 kilometers long. I thought it was a ratio of the overall track, of the overall length, but by definition, they're 100 kilometers long. And that's something. There's that. Mercedes is 2 years. And if any of this you want to spend extra time on, just go ahead
sure.
Let me know. Mercedes is 2 years behind development from everybody else. Now, then you can take that with an asterisk. So you develop in 2022 to drive in 2023. They did not like at the start of 2023 where they were. So they started redoing their development to get ready for 2024.
Now, can I get in real quick? When you say behind everybody else, though, where did they end the year last year? Like, were they fourth?
I think it was fourth.
Fourth. Okay.
I'd have to look at it. So then that's a very good point. Like they were not bottom 10 they were not bottom 5 teams by any means.
Gotcha. No, actually, I think they were third last year.
Were they?
Because it was Red Bull, and then it was between Ferrari and I think Mercedes for third.
Look that up.
Sorry,
but no, that's fine. So, but the important thing is you're right. They're not doing bad overall. But they are just not where.
But as far as a top tier team,
exactly.
you have other teams who are now sneaking up to be in that top tier. You've got McLaren and you have Aston Martin, who've both made great strides.
Exactly.
Relative to where they were 3, 4, 5 years ago. So yeah, you don't want to be the worst of the best.
Exactly. And especially since now, but it's to your point, kind of the great equalizer is the fact that everybody watched the RB19 be so dominant last year. So everybody in the field is taking notes, and they've put those RB19 mods, to use a gamer term, they're putting those RB19 mods on their cars this year.
Sure.
So Mercedes, they're talking a big game about how well they're 2 years behind everybody else. Well, no, they have a lot more notes than they would have last year. It's not a huge highlight reset, as we watched right here in FP2 when, take it for what you will, but they were 1 and 2. Yeah. So there is something there. So I was a big, if you've listened to the other podcasts, everybody, I'm a huge, I talked a big game about how Sainz and Hamilton might not be the favorites of their team. They might not be getting all the money. They might not be doing all this. I've had it brought to my attention, and it's true that the other side to that coin is the fact that they're still professional F1 racers. Like the teams are not going to not upgrade their cars. Like the teams still want to win. So the pessimist in me was very much be careful about putting your fantasy money into those two drivers, because maybe they're not going to be getting all the love that the other drivers will. But after talking to other people and watching what I've seen, I think I might have been a little premature on that. What do you think? I mean, there's no metrics really to look at yet, but
no, but I think you bring up a great point. The dynamics this year are going to be really, really fun to watch between Sainz and Leclerc.
Yeah.
Just because. I'm sorry. Were we talking about Sainz, or were we talking about?
We're talking about just in general the fact that the two drivers from two of the big teams, one of the drivers from each of the big teams, are going to be moving on.
Yeah.
So how much money is going to be put into upgrades, and how much love is coming from the current teams to try and help them win a championship, or is it going to go to the other driver?
I gotcha. Well, I think, if you look at Mercedes, Hamilton's still getting $35 million a year to drive. So when you're dropping that kind of money on a driver, you're still going to back him. Yeah. So I think, I think he's still going to put forth his best effort based on the platform that he has.
Yeah.
And so he is still going to get the support there, because he's still the primary driver for one more year.
True.
Now, Are they going to be? Who? You know what? I'm blanking out. Who's the second driver for Mercedes?
For Mercedes, that's Russell, George Russell.
Do we know his status? I mean, I know he's with the team for a while yet.
I know like half the drivers their contracts are over.
Yeah.
At the end of this year. I don't think Russell is among them. He might be, but I haven't heard the oh my gosh, Mercedes needs to reset vibe. Yeah, exactly. So I think George Russell is going to become the primary driver, unless somebody else better than him, but less than Max Verstappen. Better than him, but less than Lewis Hamilton shows up.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's inevitable. I mean, you're not going to find someone at his level of pedigree.
True.
So I think they're they're going to support him throughout this year. But with Sainz, it's a little bit interesting because he doesn't have a landing spot next.
Yeah.
And so and we've seen in years past where he's kind of gone, wait, this is my opportunity. This is my chance to do something. So I don't know how that translates for Ferrari's support of him, but I can see that the team dynamic certainly being a little bit more stressed because he's going to be out there to prove himself a lot more.
For sure. And to your point, like so with Carlos Sainz, he's lost his spot. Like he knows he will not be driving for Ferrari next year.
Right.
Half the other field, their contracts are just open.
Gotcha.
So there's be ready for a lot of talk and a lot of speculation about one of those drivers is Perez.
Yeah, with Red Bull.
Yeah. So as soon as, Sainz is open and as soon as Perez has to renegotiate, well then, what do you do? So I think there'll be a lot of mix up, but yeah, it's a little hot seat for Carlos Sainz to be, to be the one who right now doesn't have a chair.
Now, do you think it would be a fairly 1-to-1 switch if we had Hamilton go to Ferrari, which we know is happening, Sainz goes to Red Bull, and Perez goes to Mercedes?
That'd be interesting.
I mean, because none of these are disgraced drivers.
Yeah,
they're not they're not failing in their career by any stretch. They're doing well by the banner that they're flying.
And
now.
Carlos Sainz, and I don't have dates and numbers, but Carlos Sainz I know was the second driver to Charles Leclerc, who's staying on Ferrari. And the thought is always when you bring the younger driver onto a team of two, that eventually that younger driver will become the lead driver when the older driver moves on.
Sure.
Just kind of like the standard progression. The fact that they're getting rid of their younger driver for such an older driver in Ferrari, to me, says that they're pushing for a championship in 2025. That's what they're looking at.
Yeah.
And as soon as you have somebody like Sergio Perez, who does great, he was second best last year. He was second best in an RB19. So as soon as you have somebody like Carlos Sainz, who is younger, who has shown good stuff in a Ferrari, he just needs to sit in a Red Bull and then he'll be great.
Sure.
Well, then the Red Bull has to be looking at that. And then as soon as you are Mercedes and you have somebody with, again, the pedigree of Sergio Perez, who just needs to be a lead driver, well, hey, are you going to bring him in? Because I think he'd be the lead driver over George Russell. I don't know how quite that would work, but it's a lot of interesting stuff. And right now, the hot potato is, or the person listening to the music wondering what's going on, is Carlos Sainz.
Oh, for sure. And this leads me to think that we really ought to do a kind of a deep dive episode going into driver development programs for each of the camps, because I mean, so Red Bull has their RB, they essentially have their scout team within F1, which is good for them, but holy crap, that's expensive.
And there's actually, I'm gonna make a little note about that because F1 Academy, because there's F1 Academy right now. There's so basically F1 Academy is for female drivers.
Oh,
it's a specific pedigree, because it's so hard. I crunched the numbers and with best guesses, and the odds are astronomical of everybody in the entire universe who ever sat in a go-kart and said, man, I want to be an F1 driver.
Sure.
These are the 20 people doing it. And that's so as soon as you have a majority of men trying to do it, young males trying to do it as opposed to young females, well, when those numbers get whittled down to the top, it's a lot harder for a female to get all of that backing to become an F1 driver than it is for a male, because there's just more of them, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's one way to look at it, and there's a lot of ways. I'm not trying to have that be this. But if we're going to go into I say all that to say, as soon as we're going into driver development, well, then you have each team's second, you have each team's third driver, each team's, reserve drivers. You have F1 Academy, you have Formula 2, Formula 3, Formula E.
Okay.
You have a lot of feeders going into it.
But then this is where it also gets interesting too, though, because beyond all of that meritocracy aspect of it, then there's also the my dad owns the team element. And again, I don't mean to guess. So
you're absolutely right.
So with Aston Martin, what's the driver's name?
Stroll.
So yeah, so Stroll. I mean, his dad bought Aston Martin, the car company, 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And and he's pumping a lot of money into this racing team, which is great. Great for them. Their platform has gotten better, but and I don't doubt that Stroll is a phenomenal driver. He does well.
Yeah.
But would he be an F1 were his father not the owner of the team?
And that's a good question. Let me see if I might have to. There we go. See if that helps. Okay. Sorry, it was the lights were giving me a headache. Sorry about that.
And I'm sorry, I've taken this down
I love it. That's what we're here for. Remember,
so
and
that's what we're supposed to be talking about. What you're watching FP2 today, which was great, but this is I like this conversation.
Oh yeah, no, and this is why we're doing this podcast. Because
Sure,
we can just talk about it forever. And I really like the idea of looking at down the road, looking at who's coming in because you're right. And as soon as with Lance Stroll, as soon as he was rivaling Max Verstappen, and as soon as we're speaking Lance Stroll and your top 5 drivers all in the same breath, well, then it wouldn't be nepotism at all.
Oh no,
it would be, whatever. But now it's like, well, does he?
And and that's the thing. He certainly has done better than several drivers.
Absolutely.
In his 7-year career, so many have come and gone.
Yeah.
Like just with a blip.
Yep.
They've had their chance to prove themselves and have not done it, and he has. So it's I know I'm being completely unfair because I'm the guy with the microphone, and so I'm crying nepotism one second, then I'm saying no, he's fine. Everyone calm down. So I'm sorry.
Right. No.
I'm all over the board here.
That's awesome. No, it's just fine. Okay. Go down the list. Alpine. So and we'll get to the drivers here in a second.
Sure. But
I'm not going to lie. I've been looking at Alpine drivers for my fantasy league. One of the things the talking heads on F1.com, which are the best talking heads I listened to, they were talking about how Alpine is worried. Alpine is reportedly to have said that they're going to be, the first few races of the season, there's going to be more testing for them.
Okay.
So I say all that to say, be advised if you have Alpine drivers. Let's look at FP3, but there is a question mark. The team himself is putting up a question mark as to if their drivers are as to how they're going to be doing the first few races.
Sure.
Mercedes was 1 and 2 and FP2, and Hamilton looked really comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Again, if you listen to Max Verstappen, he says, well, they turned their car up and our car wasn't turned up. Fine. I'm personally very leery of Mercedes going into it just because they are so far behind development.
Sure.
But also, I would not bet anybody to bet against Lewis Hamilton, right? That's just kind of like with the NFL quarterback for the Patriots, Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you might, he shouldn't, but you don't bet against Tom Brady with the Patriots. That's just losing money.
You know what's sad
Nah.
is that like you're not wrong, but like that just dates us because like when you say Patriots, I still think Tom Brady, even though he's been retired for 2 years.
Yeah,
he was with the Broncos. And I'm sorry, the Buccaneers for years before
That's true.
that. It's
and
crazy.
didn't he win the Super Bowl with the Bucs?
He did.
See,
yeah,
and so
almost came back a second time. So but that does not invalidate your argument.
But
it's he will be an X factor in whatever team he's on. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
In 2025, half the contracts are set to expire. Talked about that. There is going to be in 2026 new regulations coming out. They're redoing the formula or however they put it. And that's just something that they mentioned in passing. But what it means is that whenever, to best of my knowledge, again, I'm more than happy to be corrected on it. Whenever the new change in regulations comes out, the new formula comes out, it requires massive overhauls in the cars.
Oh, sure.
So this entire line of evolution, suddenly when you have a widget this big that now has to be this big, or you're allowed to have 4 flanges and now you can only have 3, it forces a huge change.
Yeah.
And so a big domino effect. And so there you go.
Have we been given any indicator of how significant the changes will be, or?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
At least none that's come across my desk. So I say all that to say that we could see 2024 and 2025 be continuing with this line of effort, but then we can expect 2026 to be a big, possibly highlight and delete. Because
sure.
It was when the last changes came through, I think was when Red Bull propelled forward.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah.
And I have to look back at my Drive to Survive.
I mean, Max was still amazing.
Yeah.
Leading up to that. But it was, I believe, 2 years ago.
Okay.
2 years ago is when, the drivers walked out and said, we'll see how these cars are, and I mean, and certainly there's an element of that every year where they walk out and they say, it looks kind of the same. Let's see how it handles,
goes.
But yeah, it was 2 years ago where there were significant changes, and everyone, all the engineering teams gave their best foot forward in terms of how best to exploit those design limitations and new capacities, and Red Bull got it right early on. So
that's great. And speaking of those designs, and we can talk about it later offline, but there's a little bit of a whispers about Mercedes and their front wing, because the new rules say like all the tiers have to be one continuous piece. but something one of the announcers mentioned is that the top layer of the wing that looked to be one very thin continuous piece that still met the rules, there's a little twisty thing to pull them apart.
Interesting.
And I don't know if that was just, Bill Buxton, doing his job and noticing everything and talking about it, which is why I love watching him and listening to him. But maybe it's something, maybe it's not. But it's really interesting about finding those rules and then like reading the rules, understanding them, and working around them because, ambiguity favors the defense or something. I don't know. We'll get moving. Sorry. So for the sprint, and this is something that is new for this year, and I have a little note that says to talk about this earlier, and I didn't. So last year it was you'd qualify like on Friday or whatever. You would qualify for the race, and then have then qualify for the sprint the next day. Or on Saturday it was a sprint qualifying, then a sprint race. It was all out of order.
Yeah.
But now this year it's on Friday. You have a free practice for the sprint qualifying. Then on Saturday you have the sprint race, and then a free practice for the race. And then on Sunday, you have the race.
Gotcha.
The big asterisk is not for the first few races because they're all on Saturday and things are all weird. But that's a schedule change. So as soon as you're like me and you're scratching your head going, what's going on? That's what's going on.
Sure. Now, I got to say, though, I just sat back and watched my first practice ever with you.
Yeah.
And the limited things that I have seen from saying, oh, what is F1 to now, the one commonality I've found is that there are 8 million things that can go wrong with a car, with a driver, with something that happens when you pit. So how hard are these drivers pushing their cars during practice?
That all comes down to, and you're not going to it depends, because each team has their own plans. Kind of like, and I've said it before in the podcast, where with the fantasy Formula One operates differently than the actual Formula One. The team's goals in real life don't mirror fantasy Formula One at all. Because
and they can't.
They can't. You can't worry about, what's my fantasy team going to do?
Right.
Because you want to qualify good, and if you qualify good, like Ferrari last year, they qualify great, finish mediocre. Well, they're still going to do that every time. When for fantasy players, it'd be better to qualify low, finish mediocre. Maybe depending on how mediocre and what kind of swings they have. So all the talking heads, ourselves included, love looking at little things and trying to extrapolate out what it means. Mm-hmm. Everybody loves talking about how Williams and Haas might be doing great. Everyone loves to talk about how, Max Verstappen and Red Bull might not be doing great. Like, these are just the topics that in the end we secretly want the underdog to do wonderful, and we want the king to be knocked off their throne.
Yeah, well, yeah.
We absolutely do.
We always want a new king.
So, but that being said, as soon as, like for today, Max Verstappen finished middle of the pack for his practice, you can't read into it. He's going to go as fast as he wants to.
Right.
And the guys who do really fast. Now, and this is me, I've never sat in a race car, period, of any kind. Mm-hmm. Okay. But as soon as I'm racing, there might be practices where they want me to show off because somebody is here and they want to see the car go really fast.
Yeah.
There might be, we need to save tires, so only do a few laps, don't put too much in them. There might be, hey, if we're teammates, we need to really work on your car with all the engineers, so I'll get a few laps to make sure everything's good, and they're going to give you more because you have more points and they want you to compete with somebody else, but I'm going to be stuck in the middle, whatever. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. So as I kept saying today, you can't put too much value in what they do with practice. You can tell sometimes if they start doing horribly,
right,
or if something's wrong, or if they crash. Like when Daniel Ricciardo crashed last year, it was during practice. I think it was like FP2. So if you watched him crash, you knew that something was wrong with his arm, and you were waiting. I was waiting for Fantasy Formula One app to out him and put in whoever was going to replace him, because he was on my fantasy team.
Yeah.
And so you're waiting for that to happen so you can make the change. And I think I kind of digressed from your initial question, but the answer is just you don't know.
Sure.
You push it hard, you don't push it hard. It comes down to each team and what they want to accomplish, and that's something that they keep close hold to their chest. and then we can armchair quarterback it for the
Oh,
rest
sure,
of the season.
and that's the fun thing too. 'Cause,
Yeah.
while we're watching the practice, the commentary is you're hearing them go, Max Verstappen is clearly unhappy with the platform today. He's struggling here, and he's middle of the pack. And then of course afterwards, I think what by far the most telling thing is, and even this is very subjective, is the post practice interviews, because we see Max Verstappen then, and he's on screen and he's
smiling,
he's happy as a clam, super calm, super composed, and it wasn't just a well practiced PR background. It was no, he seems more than content with where he is in life right now.
For sure, he's making his millions and his car's doing just fine.
Exactly. And so for all of the on screen observations that you're being fed, we really don't know where things stand, and speaking to that level of ambiguity, because you also had Oscar Piastri, who he's with McLaren, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He gives he gave the most standard post sports event interview ever. It was just like, we're content with some things, other things we weren't so content with. We're gonna have to go back and watch a few laps just to identify causative factors, both for good and for bad.
Yeah.
So things are where they stand, and it was. I don't know why I'm giving it. He's Australian. I can't do a good Australian accent. I'll probably do something inadvertently offensive, but
no, you're absolutely right.
But it's like he said a lot while saying absolutely nothing. It's like I was driving the car that I was in, and the things that were good were good, and the things that were bad were bad, and we'll look at the things that were good and the things that were bad.
Right, like because we're Americans, so we all watch NFL football.
Oh yeah,
right. And so whenever you in between quarters or whatever, they'll stick the microphone in the coach's face, or like if you watch like March Madness and stuff that's coming up, they're like, "Coach, how do you feel about this?" Well, we need to move the ball better on offense. We need to be better at defense, and we got to get the ball in the end zone. We got to put up some points.
Ultimately, the strategy is to score some more points.
Exactly.
If we got a few more, we would have won that game. Like, well said.
Well, we got to make the kicks, and we got to hit 3-pointers and the field goals. Yeah, you do.
So completely unrelated. If you ever watched the movie Bedazzled with Brendan Fraser, it's a Harold Ramis movie. It's a mediocre movie with some laugh out loud moments, and there's one where he's a basketball player and he gives the most sportsy interview ever. And it's like, well, you want to give 110%, and you think you play good. And you want to play good. I think we played pretty good tonight. So anyway, that this was a microcosm of that today. It's a blast to watch, and it's you can't not speculate.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's when you're watching practice, unless you're getting a status of like, oh no, there's something seriously wrong with that car. It's all speculation.
It's all speculation, and you learn, and we'll continue to talk about it more. But you learn a little bit like where. And how about this? And this is what I'll say, then we can move on to our teams, which is really why we're here. Max Verstappen last year, I loved when he qualified horribly. When he and Sergio Perez come in the middle of the bottom 10, you love it. Why? Because they're going to pass a whole bunch of people. And they're going to get 60 points for your team.
Yeah.
So the question is, and here's a big fantasy tip for all you fantasy people out there, which is why you're listening to this podcast, there are some drivers that can just pass people, right? And as soon as they have a bad qualifying day, you love it and you keep them there and you break out the popcorn, because as soon as they qualify poor, they're going to do great. Ferrari was not one of those last year, and I'm really excited. We're going to talk about Ferrari here in a second. Like Ferrari last year, if they qualified poor, they're going to finish worse. If they qualified great, they're going to finish mediocre. They didn't have the full race pace that Red Bull had. And so, if you rewind a few more years, like back to 2020, you could not beat Mercedes. It didn't matter where Lewis Hamilton started in the pack. He would just pass you. And it was only a matter of time before he did it. So with those teams in those years, for fantasy players, we'd love it if they qualified low, so they would just even get more points.
And just to recap, just because I'm the new guy here, I want to make sure I'm understanding properly. You like that because you're not just getting the placement points.
Exactly.
But you're also getting all the passing points. You have a greater potential to get maybe that top lap.
Yep.
That fastest lap extra set of points.
And so you get, for example, position delta points. So if you start 10th and you finish first, you get, what is it, 10 points or 9 points? 10.
You get 9 because you're passing 9.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I was like,
but plus first place now as well.
Yeah. So while I was going before you get to the first place is
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No, that was good. We start 10th, finish first.
Yeah,
that's 9 points. Plus, you get a point for every overtake you do. So if you pass 5 people, then you go in the pits, and then you pass 6 people, that's 11 places.
Okay.
So it's very possible for you to, if you only overtake in a straight line, you finish 9 points ahead, 9 positions ahead, but you also overtook 9 people.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that's 9. That's 18 points. When if you qualified first, you get what, 9 or 10.
Yep.
So as soon as you, let's say if you're like Max Verstappen, who qualified, I think it was 14th or 15th once, and then either won or came in second, call it 14. That's 14 points based on position. He had to pass 14 people. That's 30. And then he gets, call it 30, 28, and then he gets 25 or 35 or whatever points for finishing first.
Yeah.
And you would have like a 60, 70 point bump. And then if he's your DRS driver, that's doubled. And if you use your 3x DRS token on him instead that race, if you happen to,
Sure.
then that could have been almost a 200-point race where he qualified low, and you would have gotten half those points if he had qualified high.
Gotcha. Okay.
So-
Well, and with that, so say you're doubling up, and you've also got Red Bull as your constructor for a race that happened like we just described. Now, do you get all of the same passing points for the drivers for your constructor as well?
All right, say it one more time. Sorry, I was getting our...
Sure.
Getting
So when your constructor points.
Yeah.
So say you have Red Bull as well. So you're getting all the points that Max would have gotten had he performed like we just described,
Yeah.
right? Does that include all of the overtakes as well, or is it just
Yes.
is it just the positional
To
point?
the best of my knowledge, it is all the overtakes as well.
Oh, wow.
Because
Okay.
it is a team effort. There are some, and we can look back at the rules actually real quick while we're talking about it. Let's go to League Prizes, What's New, How to Play Game Rules. Let's look at constructors, sprints, races, drivers, constructors. Constructors will score the combined total of their 2 drivers in the race as listed above, which is all the other stuff.
Okay.
With the exception of the driver of the day points, with the driver of the day bonus. Constructors will also score points based on fastest pit stop and stuff like that. So, yeah. So as soon as your guy passes the field, if he starts 20th and finishes first, he gets 19 points for that delta in position.
Yeah.
He gets 19. He passed at least 19 people, assuming they all didn't go to the pits and
Sure.
then he passed them. And then your constructor gets that multiplier as well.
Okay.
So, which is why it's huge to have the good constructors as well as the good drivers, but also because as soon as there's a split in your drivers, if you have one driver that's doing horrible and as soon as one driver does great and gets you 20 points and one driver DNFs, then your constructor gets 0.
Gotcha.
So, because it's a total of them all. But does that answer that
It
question?
absolutely does. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So we're going to move forward here and work on some Fantasy Formula 1 lineups. And how long have we been at this right now?
It's been a minute.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and pause it and then have the next episode. It'll be back to back. Don't worry, you'll be fine. We'll have the next episode be talking about the Fantasy F1 lineups. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next time.